They broke his life, but they did not calculate the ending. That is how this story should begin, because the ending was already moving toward them long before they noticed him. At 6:40 in the morning, when Chicago was still half asleep and the river looked like dark metal, Evan Cole was already awake, not because he wanted to be, but because sleep had learned to avoid him. It slipped away the moment his eyes closed. Like a coward who knew too much 3 years earlier, he had a life that could be described with one simple word: normal, a rented house in Cicero, a job as a logistics analyst near O'Hare, weekend barbecues, a wife who laughed loudly, plans that felt solid enough to stand on. Then one Tuesday in October, at 9:17 a.m., everything cracked. The police said it was an accident, a warehouse fire, wrong place, wrong time, his wife inside. The company said it was a tragedy, the insurance company said it was complicated, and the court said there was not enough evidence. Evan learned that day how many ways the word sorry could sound empty, as Mark Twain once said. History does not repeat itself, but it often rhymes, and Evan did not know it yet, but his life had just found a very dark rhythm. The first sharp turn came quietly, not with sirens, but with a letter, plain white envelope, company logo, words chosen by lawyers, termination due to restructuring. The second turn came 2 weeks later, mortgage default notice. The third came when he realized the fire report had missing pages, names removed, timestamps altered, small details that only someone trained to notice patterns would see. Another quote echoed in his head. Friedrich Nietzsche once warned, "He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster." And Evan laughed bitterly when he remembered that line, because at that moment he was not fighting anything, he was barely standing. He started walking at night through South Side streets, past closed diners and flickering streetlights, listening instead of thinking. People talk when they believe no one important is around. Truck drivers, security guards, a tired bartender who mentioned a payoff without realizing it mattered. By the end of that winter, Evan Cole understood one terrifying thing. His life was not broken by chance. It was broken by calculation, and the people who did it believed the story was already over. They were wrong. In January of 2019, the cold in Chicago felt personal, like the city itself had chosen a side. The wind cut through coats and excuses alike, and Evan learned to measure days not by dates, but by discoveries, each one heavier than the last. The next sharp turn arrived on a Wednesday night, inside a 24-hour copy shop near Roosevelt Road, fluorescent lights buzzing like nervous insects. Evan stood over a scanner feeding in old fire inspection reports he had pulled from public archives when he noticed something that made his hands stop. The same inspector's name appeared again and again, always before major industrial fires, always transferred shortly after he whispered the name out loud, just once, as if sound could unlock memory. Thomas Hale, a quote drifted up from somewhere deep. Abraham Lincoln once said, "You can fool some of the people all of the time, and all of the people some of the time, but you cannot fool all of the people all of the time." Evan felt that sentence land in his chest like a promise or a threat. Another turn followed fast, almost too fast. His phone rang from a blocked number, a man's voice calm and polite, almost friendly, advising him to stop asking questions, saying it was for his own good. Evan replied with silence, because silence makes people nervous, and the man hung up. First that same night, Evan noticed a dark sedan parked across from his house. Engine off, lights dead. It stayed there for exactly 43 minutes, then vanished. He wrote the time down anyway. The story twisted again when an old colleague reached out through an encrypted email, a woman named Lisa Moreno who used to audit shipping manifests. She claimed the warehouse fire had nothing to do with logistics and everything to do with erasing inventory records. Chemical shipments rerouted, mislabeled, vanished. Fires cleaned the rest. George Orwell once warned, "In a time of deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act." Evan read that line twice and felt the weight of it settle into his bones. Because he was no longer just looking for answers, he was becoming a problem. By the end of that month, Evan Cole understood something else. Someone was watching him closely, and someone else was afraid. And those two facts rarely exist without leading to violence. February arrived with dirty snow and restless nights, and Evan learned how sound changes when fear is nearby. Footsteps echo longer, doors seem to breathe. Even silence starts to hum, like it knows something you do not. The next turn came inside a church basement on the west side. a place that smelled of old coffee and second chances. Lisa Moreno sat across from him at a folding table, hands wrapped around a paper cup. She spoke fast, not because she wanted to, but because stopping felt dangerous. She explained how certain companies used warehouses as temporary ghosts, places where shipments existed on paper just long enough to be insured, then disappeared. Fires cleaned the rest. Evan listened, nodded, and felt the ground tilt again when she said one sentence that split everything open. Your wife signed off on a report the night before the fire. For a moment he could not hear his own breathing. Grief twisted into something sharper, something with edges. He wanted to deny it, but Lisa slid the document across the table. A digital copy, signature verified, timestamp precise. A line from Ernest Hemingway surfaced without warning. The world breaks everyone, and afterward some are strong at the broken places. Evan wondered what grew in the places where love had shattered. Another turn followed immediately. Outside the church, a man waited near a black SUV pretending to check his phone. When Evan walked past him, the man looked up just long enough to confirm recognition. Evan did not run. Running invites pursuit. Instead, he walked slower. That night his house was searched, not ransacked, searched. Drawers opened neatly, laptop untouched. Only one thing missing, the binder with fire reports. Whoever came knew exactly what mattered. A quote from Sun Tzu echoed like advice whispered too late. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. Evan realized he barely knew either, but he was learning fast. By the end of February, Evan Cole understood that his wife had been pulled into something she could not step away from, and that her death was not a mistake. It was a correction, and corrections tend to repeat until someone stops the hand that writes them. March was gray and restless, the kind of month where even the river seemed to hesitate, frozen in anger or memory, and Evan walked streets he had never noticed before, alleys that smelled of salt and rust, corners where shadow met shadow, listening to everything as if sound might whisper a secret. The next sharp turn came on a Thursday afternoon, a call from an unfamiliar voice claiming knowledge, offering a meeting in a nondescript diner in Bridgeport. Evan did not trust it, and he did not refuse it. Mistrust is a shield, caution a weapon. He arrived early, car parked 2 blocks away, eyes scanning, mind tracing possible exits. The diner was quiet. Only the hum of a coffee machine, the clink of cups, and a man who introduced himself as Callahan. No first name, coat dusted with salt from the river, hair slicked back, eyes like they had seen too much, too soon. He said, "You want answers about the fire, about your wife. You're asking the wrong questions. The right ones will hurt more." Evan said nothing, letting the words sit between them like stones in water. Callahan continued, "People you trust are often the first to betray. It is easier to manipulate a mind that refuses to see. And believe me, your mind has been targeted for years." Another turn came when Callahan slid a folder across. Inside, surveillance photos of Evan himself, weeks of following, notes on routines, observations about his habits. Evan's chest tightened, the cold reality settling. He was being hunted, watched, studied like a chess piece, and the fire had been the opening move. A quote surfaced in his memory, from Winston Churchill: "Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts." And Evan clung to it, because courage was all he had left, and failure had already broken everything else. Then the diner window rattled. A truck passed too close, or maybe something else. And for the first time, Evan felt fear slip into rage. The turns were not just obstacles anymore. They were invitations, calling him to act, to change the rules. By the end of that day, Evan Cole understood 2 things clearly. 1, the people who broke his life assumed he would crumble. And 2, no one had ever taught them how dangerous broken people could become, and that knowledge made the next moves inevitable. April arrived with drizzle and the smell of wet asphalt, streets reflecting neon signs like fractured mirrors, and Evan moved through them, as if the city itself was a map of his anger. Every corner a possible clue, every passerby a potential ally or threat. The next sharp turn came when Lisa Moreno emailed him coordinates, a warehouse on the South Loop. She claimed the files there would explain everything about the insurance fraud, the chemical shipments, the missing people. Evan hesitated only a moment. Hesitation is expensive, and he drove through puddles that reflected streetlights like distant stars, arriving at the building that smelled of metal and old smoke inside. The warehouse was abandoned, except for a single desk, papers scattered in patterns that only someone desperate would notice. Evan flipped through them. Every invoice, every shipping record, every chemical tag telling the story he had already guessed but was afraid to say aloud. His wife had not died by accident. She had been silenced. A witness who almost spoke. Another turn came as he noticed footprints in the dust, fresh, leading toward the back exit. Evan followed, heart calm but senses sharp, and in a corner, under a tarp, a cache of documents and hard drives, precise, deliberate, waiting as if someone expected him or wanted him to find it. The line from Marcus Aurelius drifted into his mind. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way, and he smiled darkly. Then came the knock, soft but deliberate. Evan spun around. Empty hall, only shadows moving like predators. The third knock echoed from the mezzanine. He climbed carefully, each step measured, and there, silhouetted against a broken window, a man in a dark jacket, gun held loosely, eyes cold, said simply, "You should have stopped." Evan did not flinch. Rage gave clarity. Fear sharpened his reflexes. He remembered Nietzsche again. He who fights with monsters should see to it that he does not become a monster. And he understood the truth. Monsters did not get warnings. Monsters did not negotiate. Monsters acted. And Evan was no longer just a man chasing answers. He was a reckoning. The encounter ended with glass shattered, footsteps running, a gun dropped, and Evan holding the folder that contained his life rewritten. A sharp turn he could not have predicted, the first real victory in months. And it tasted like ash and rain by the end of April. Evan Cole knew one thing: his life had been broken by people who thought endings were predictable. But the ending had always been moving, unstoppable, and now, for the first time, he was in control of the story. May arrived like a warning, the sun barely cutting through clouds, and Evan felt it in his bones. Tension riding every street, every alley, every glance from strangers who might be allies or enemies. The city itself seemed to whisper, "Move carefully, move fast." The next sharp turn hit him at a diner near the Chicago River, greasy coffee and vinyl booths. When a man approached with a laptop, no words at first, just a USB drive placed on the table, Evan hesitated, then plugged it in, screens lighting up with emails, contracts, internal memos, all pointing to a network of people who had orchestrated the fire, manipulated insurance, covered tracks, and one name repeated more than any other: Thomas Hale, Inspector, Ghost, Predator. He whispered. They thought they could break everything, and felt anger like liquid fire, ready to shape itself into decisions, plans, vengeance. Another turn came minutes later, as the diner door opened and a waitress slipped him a note. No name, just 3 words: "He knows you." Evan's pulse quickened, every sense alert, counting the nights of being watched, tracked, hunted. But now he was prepared. He changed direction, looping through streets lined with murals and crumbling factories, drawing the follower into a pattern of Evan's design, then ducked into a shadowed alley, heartbeat echoing loud enough to think someone else could hear it, only to watch the follower pass, frustrated, invisible. And that frustration would become a clue. A quote drifted into his mind from Franklin D. Roosevelt: "When you come to the end of your rope, tie a knot and hang on." And Evan felt that knot tighten, determination replacing fatigue. Because survival had become secondary to justice, and justice demanded precision. By the end of June, Evan Cole understood a critical truth. The people who broke his life had believed in control. They had believed in predictability. But control is fragile. Predictability is an illusion. And when someone broken decides to fight back, the fractures of the past become the tools of the present. The first strikes in a battle they never expected. July in Chicago was loud and sticky. Streets buzzing with tourists, cars, and heat waves rising off the asphalt. But Evan moved as if the city had shrunk for him alone. Each step measured, each corner a potential battlefield, every face a question mark. The next sharp turn came in an underground parking garage near the Loop, fluorescent lights flickering, echoing footsteps, a man waiting beside a black SUV, cigarette smoke curling around his fingers, eyes cold, and Evan recognized him immediately, the man from the diner months ago, Callahan. Only this time the tone was different, less warning, more challenge. "You're getting close," he said, Closer than you should, and closer than Hale wants. Evan's lips twitched. Then I'll make sure he regrets it. The words coming sharper than he expected, tasting like steel and fire. Another turn came when Callahan handed over a map. Not digital, paper thick and creased, marks showing locations Evan had never noticed. Warehouses, offices, safe houses, every place connected to Hale's web. And in one corner, a red circle around a chemical plant on the far south side, the heart of the operation, and Evan felt the pulse of the plan quicken in his chest. That night, driving past the river, the skyline blurred in rain on the windshield. Evan listened to the city hum, thinking about a quote from Sun Tzu. All warfare is based on deception, and he understood that the war had been going on before he even knew it. Deception layered over deception, lies stacked like bricks, and now it was his turn to rewrite the architecture. Another sharp turn hit when Lisa called, voice urgent. Evan, they know we're tracing it. We've traced your signal. And he felt the thrill of danger spike, the kind only fear sharpened by knowledge can give. But he stayed calm, repeating in his mind Marcus Aurelius' words, the impediment to action advances action, because obstacles are only as dangerous as you let them be. He moved fast, driving through the rain-soaked streets toward the south side dockyards, shadows stretching across containers, the smell of water and oil thick in the air, and in that chaos, Evan felt alive, every sense tuned, calculating each step, each possible encounter, each risk, because the sharp turns had taught him this. The endgame favors the one who adapts, not the one who waits. Then came the final twist of the night. A black SUV appeared silently behind him, engine low, lights dim, two men stepping out, guns ready, and Evan realized they had expected him to panic, to run, to make a mistake, but he didn't. He had learned every turn, every trap, every pattern, and he used it, leading them into a maze of containers, cutting lights, disappearing into shadows, and in that moment the hunter became the hunted. By the end of May, Evan Cole understood clearly. The people who broke his life had underestimated his mind, underestimated his will, underestimated his readiness to become more dangerous than they had imagined. And somewhere deep inside, he smiled because the game was only just beginning. June hit Chicago with humidity that stuck to skin and nerves alike, streets shimmering with heat off asphalt, and Evan moved like a shadow, blending into crowds, listening to conversations he shouldn't hear, noticing patterns no one else saw. Each step a careful calculation, each breath a shield. The next sharp turn came in a library on South State Street, stacks of books smelling of dust and forgotten knowledge. Lisa Moreno waiting with a stack of printouts, images and spreadsheets scrolling faster than his eyes could follow. She said, "This is what Hale doesn't want you to see." And Evan felt the weight of it before opening it. Insurance fraud, warehouse transfers, falsified inspection records, and worst of all, surveillance footage of the night his wife died, showing her cornered, confronted, pleading silently with a man in a dark coat, the one who now had a name. Thomas Hale, he whispered. They thought my grief would blind me. And the words felt like steel in his mouth, each one cutting through disbelief, each one sharpening resolve, because grief had been a tool, but rage was a weapon. Another turn came that evening when Evan noticed someone following him across the lakefront trail, bike riding silently, distance maintained, tracking, waiting, testing him, and he smiled darkly because now the hunter had a target he could see. He changed direction, looping through streets lined with murals and crumbling factories, drawing the follower into a pattern of Evan's design, then ducked into a shadowed alley, heartbeat echoing loud enough to think someone else could hear it, only to watch the follower pass, frustrated, invisible, and that frustration would become a clue. A quote drifted into his mind from Franklin D. Roosevelt. When you come to the end of your rope, tie a knot and hang on, and Evan felt that knot tighten, determination replacing fatigue, because survival had become secondary to justice, and justice demanded precision. By the end of June, Evan Cole understood a truth that would guide him from now on. The people who broke his life had thought in terms of endings, calculations, and the next sharp turn came in an underground parking garage near the loop, fluorescent lights flickering, echoing footsteps, a man waiting beside a black SUV, cigarette smoke curling around his fingers, eyes cold, and Evan recognized him immediately. The man from the diner months ago, Callahan, Only this time the tone was different, less warning, more challenge. "You're getting close," he said. "Closer than you should, and closer than Hale wants." Evan's lips twitched. "Then I'll make sure he regrets it." The words coming sharper than he expected, tasting like steel and fire. Another turn came when Callahan handed over a map. Not digital, paper thick and creased, marks showing locations Evan had never noticed. Warehouses, offices, safe houses, every place connected to Hale's web, and in one corner a red circle around a chemical plant on the far south side, the heart of the operation. And Evan felt the pulse of the plan quicken in his chest that night. Driving past the river, the skyline blurred in rain on the windshield. Evan listened to the city hum, thinking about a quote from Sun Tzu. All warfare is based on deception, and he understood that the war had been going on before he even knew it. Deception layered over deception, lies stacked like bricks, and now it was his turn to rewrite the architecture. Another sharp turn hit when Lisa called, voice urgent. "Evan, they know we're tracing it. They've traced your signal." And he felt the thrill of danger spike, the kind only fear sharpened by knowledge can give. But he stayed calm, repeating in his mind Marcus Aurelius' words, "The impediment to action advances action, because obstacles are only as dangerous as you let them be." He moved fast, driving through the rain-soaked streets toward the south side dockyards, shadows stretching across containers, the smell of water and oil thick in the air. And in that chaos, Evan felt alive, every sense tuned, calculating each step, each possible encounter, each risk, because the sharp turns had taught him this. The endgame favors the one who adapts, not the one who waits. Then came the final twist of the night. A black SUV appeared silently behind him, engine low, lights dim. Two men stepping out, guns ready, and Evan realized they had expected him to panic, to run, to make a mistake. But he didn't. He had learned every turn, every trap, every pattern, and he used it, leading them into a maze of containers, cutting lights, disappearing into shadows. And in that moment the hunter became the hunted. By the end of October, Evan Cole knew something undeniable. The people who broke his life had underestimated him at every turn, and their calculation had failed because they had forgotten one rule. A man with nothing left to lose will turn every trap into a weapon, and every sharp turn into an opportunity. November arrived like a warning, cold and gray, wind slicing down Michigan Avenue, and Evan moved through it like a ghost, every step careful, every breath measured, because the sharp turns had become his teachers, and mistakes were no longer an option. Only precision and timing mattered. Then came the moment that made everything crystallize. A letter slid under his door, and signed, simple, "It's over, if you want it to be." And Evan understood the irony. It was over because he had made it over. Over the traps, over the lies, over the fear. And yet it was only the beginning, because the power of surviving every sharp turn meant he could now shape the future instead of reacting to it. By the end of February, Evan Cole had written the final chapter, not with vengeance alone, but with justice, with clarity, with the knowledge that broken does not mean defeated, and that life, no matter how cruelly fractured, can be rebuilt stronger, sharper, unstoppable. And the city itself seemed to hum, in recognition of the man who had survived every turn and emerged unbroken, ready to face whatever came next.